The Winds of Winter is like GTA 6 for us indoor people who have weird fetishes. We've been waiting on this book for years now. In fact, there might be some of you watching this video who weren't even alive when the last book came out. And if you are 13-year-old and you're watching this video, then go back to watching Sesame Street, my friend. It's on the YouTube Kids app. But why is The Winds of Winter taking so long? Is it because George has writer's block? Is it because he's writing A Dream of Spring alongside? Is it because The Winds of Winter is secretly the second Bible? We will find out that and more. So yeah, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, first and foremost, we gotta get the obvious out of the way. George R.R. Martin is not a fast writer, and he knows it. And we all should too, and we gotta understand that.
Is there anything that you've always wanted to ask me? Because, George, I will.
Yes, there is something I want to ask you.
All right.
How the f do you write so many books so fast? I think, I've had a really good 6 months. I've written 3 chapters, and you've finished 3 books in that time.
George R.R. Martin is a slow writer. This dude writes like he's going to live 1,000,000 years. So the question becomes, why is he such a slow writer now? Because it hasn't always been like this. And this is when we get to the meat of this mystery. The Winds of Winter isn't just a normal book. It's the start of the end game. It's arguably the Avengers Infinity War of the franchise. And it's just so complex. And it mainly has to do with characters. The characters are finally starting to interweb.
I'm done with some of the characters. You know, the characters all interweave.
Sure.
So I've actually finished with a couple of the characters. I got their whole story, but not others. So I have to finish all that weaving, but it's still going to take me a while.
Characters are no longer going to be separated. It's all going to be one big orgy soon. And just like an orgy, it's gonna take some time to get everything organized and the people organized. And soon they're gonna move together. For a normal book, this is good. But a book series like A Song of Ice and Fire, the endings are always the most painful to write. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, just take a look at Clash of Kings, for example. The second book in The Song of Ice and Fire. There's not many, if any, POV characters that are talking to each other for most of the book. The only POV characters that I remember coming together are Theon and Bran. They do some shenanigans from time to time, mainly at the end of the book though. And Tyrion and Sansa. That's mainly it. So needless to say, that's a lot easier to write than The Winds of Winter, where you have Jon Snow, Melisandre, and Ser Davos pretty close. And you got Tyrion, Barristan, and Daenerys not too far apart, and a few others as well. It's a lot harder to write. It's pretty wildly assumed that in Winds of Winter, Daenerys and Tyrion are gonna meet at some point. And Barristan is not far behind. So that's a crap ton of information and just overall pacing issues that George has to solve. And this is made 10 times worse with the whole gardening thing. George R.R. Martin is a gardener writer, as he always says, and not an architect writer. If you don't know what that is, the only way I can explain it is imagine it's 3 a.m, it's a rainy day, you can't sleep, and you're you know what, I think I'm gonna touch myself. And you start doing your business, and an architect writer, they know exactly which website to go to, and exactly which video to click on, and exactly which part of the video to finish to. The gardener writer, on the other hand, well, they kind of just go through all the websites and all the categories and just kind of see where the night takes where the night takes them, you know. I think you know what I mean. That's basically what George's process is when he's writing these books.
George R.R. Martin has repeatedly stressed that he is what he calls a gardener writer, as opposed to an architect writer. This is how he describes it. My stories grow and evolve and change as I write them. I generally know where I am going, sure, the final destinations, the big set pieces, they have been in my head for years, for decades in the case of A Song of Ice and Fire. There are lots of devils in the detail, though, and sometimes the ground changes under my feet as the words pour forth. That, I'm sure, works well for him when writing short stories or at the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire. If something strikes his muse, he can simply follow it and let the story go that way instead.
Yeah, George doesn't know what kind of porn he watches. He's a man that likes to fly with the wind at 3 a.m. But all that does make a lot of sense. George will take a lot of time with the Winds of Winter because of it. And being a Gardner writer just doesn't help that at all. Especially with all these characters running paths across each other now. Like, let's just use Jon Snow's resurrection for example. Let's say Jon Snow gets revived just like he did in the TV show. And let's assume it happens in the exact same way, where Melisandre gives him a nice fade and uses like an Overwatch revive combo to bring him back. And then the question becomes, who does Joe go into the garden with? Does he go with Melisandre, who is doing the witchcraft spell? Does he go with Sir Davos, who is watching the witchcraft spell and having like crazy different thoughts? Or do you go with Jon Snow, who afterwards is alone in the room and we need to tell if he's alive or not? It's just very, very tricky. And the craziest part is that George has 100% confirmed in the past that he writes like multiple storylines and see if they work and see where the garden takes him. And then afterwards, he just rips up all the pages because he only needed to tell the story in one way. George literally writes more than he needs for just 1 or 2 chapters and see which one he likes more. He said he did this for his most recent novel.
All of these things were balls I had thrown up into the air, and they're all linked and chronologically entwined. The return of Drogon to the city was something I explored as happening at different times. For example, I wrote 3 different versions of Quentyn's arrival at Meereen. One where he had arrived long before Dany's marriage, one where he arrived much later, and one where he arrived just the day before the marriage, which is how it ended up being in the novel. And I had to write all 3 versions to be able to compare and see how these different arrival points affected the stories of other characters, including the story of a character who actually hasn't arrived yet.
So yeah, this motherfucker has chapters we will never get to see. I would love to be in George's mind for just like a little bit, man, and see the strings that hold the universe together. But the big question is Mr. Martin writing A Dream of Spring alongside The Winds of Winter? Now this is all based on like speculation, but sometimes speculation is true. Just look at the R. Kelly case where he was peeing on 14-year-olds. Like, speculation is sometimes true. But the answer to this question, again, this is like my answer, and my answer is that yes, George R.R. Martin has been writing A Dream of Spring while he's been on Winds of Winter. And the reason why I think this is because the big man George Martin was already writing Winds of Winter alongside A Dance with Dragons. Like, we know this for a fact.
In a July 2010 blog post, he reports that Aeron Dampere was cut from Dance, that is the Forsaken chapter, along with 100 manuscript pages, that is roughly 5 chapters, and he speaks of this as progress on Winds. So Dance has gotten a smidge shorter, but is still not done. The good news is, I seem to have written more than 100 pages of The Winds of Winter already.
So we do know this crazy mofo was writing Winds during A Dance with Dragons. And even though some of it was just like push content from Dance, at the end of the day it doesn't really matter, because all that really matters is that we're gonna get Dream of Spring earlier. And for the record, I do believe that. I don't think A Dream of Spring is anywhere near as complicated as The Winds of Winter. I would say A Dream of Spring is actually a lot more easier to write than even like A Storm of Swords, for example. I don't have much evidence to that, like, so you might just have to take my brown ass's word for that. But I imagine the conclusion and the destroying of the webs of these characters is far more than creating and navigating and destroying the webs and having to keep certain webs for the next book. It just makes a lot of sense to me. And I also do kind of feel for George, because I think a huge reason why he might be scared to like publish The Winds of Winter is how unbelievably toxic this community has become. The Song of Ice and Fire community is more dangerous than downtown Chicago. The real life Crips versus Blood gang war is more friendly than this community, man. It is fucking crazy. And George knows it.
He's talking to the Chicago Tribune's John Cass about Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and why The Winds of Winter has taken so long to write. Cass covered a wide range of topics, starting with how Martin feels about having millions of fans out there eager to read Winds, the long-awaited 6th book in his saga. Predictably, Martin says it's a mixed blessing. For many writers, Martin explains, the problem is getting noticed at all. He has a very different issue. I do indeed have millions of people waiting for the book to come out, which is very gratifying, but some of them are extremely impatient, and some of them are full of their own ideas about the fates of the various characters. I am glad they can get so emotionally involved with the characters, but sometimes I yearn for the days when I could just work in quiet obscurity, but those days are gone for me, I'm afraid. This is the reality of my life now.
The community is crazy. I mean, I'm sure George has seen the toxicity within it, and it's just not gonna be good for him. Like, for example, there's a lot of people like me that think Daenerys is most likely Azor Ahai. Again, that's like a whole nother topic. My opinion kind of changes when referring to like Jon sometimes with the Prince That Was Promised, especially in the TV show. But assuming Azor Ahai and the Prince That Was Promised are the exact same people, I personally think it's going to go to Daenerys. But if Jon Snow is Azor Ahai, I absolutely have no problem with that at all. But those toxic ass 16-year-olds who have Daenerys as their profile pic, they won't accept that. They won't accept George making Jon Azor Ahai and the Prince That Was Promised. If you don't believe me, just go on TikTok and Twitter and search up the Prince That Was Promised, and you'll see thousands of teenagers and lonely unwashed adults hating on anyone who thinks Jon is Azor Ahai. So I'm sure George knows how ass this community has gotten. And he already stated that he didn't really like how many people disliked the final season of Game of Thrones. Something that he didn't even write. So imagine how horrible it's going to be for George to get hate and get mad at him for something that he did write. And I'm sure George doesn't even really like the whole like weird toxic Team Black versus Team Green stuff either. Like those kids who go on Twitter and are like, oh, I'm Team Black and I hate Alicent and I have no friends and no one loves me, or I'm Team Green and I hate Rhaenyra and I get absolutely no pussy. I doubt George likes any of that. And I do think George genuinely knows that the expectation for the Winds is just unbelievably high. If the Winds of Winter gets 4 stars out of 5, that is way too low for like the toxic side of this community. And it's kind of sad if you think about it. But overall, The Winds of Winter is just a giant ass book to write.
You know, the biggest books so far were the 3rd volume, Storm of Swords, and the 5th volume, Dance with Dragons. Those were both about 1,500 pages of manuscript. Yep. This one's going to be bigger than either of that.
So George genuinely just has so much to write. Like, that's basically what it really comes down to as well. It's a giant ass book. It may be literally writing the Bible 2.0. And it's just going to take him time. I already made my prediction on the Winds of Winter release date in my last Winds of Winter video. So check out that in my channel if you want to see that. But I am really, really optimistic about it. Again, I explained that in my other video. But one thing that's crazy is that when we get this book, there's gonna be a part of me that's gonna kind of miss these days, you know? Miss the days where we're all like waiting on this book. And we even had like TV shows making fun of George for it.
George R.R. Martin, you better be working on that new book.
I am!
You said you would finish it years ago.
I'm gonna!
They already made 2 TV shows about it.
I know that! I went to the parties!
No more parties until you finish that book.
I'm writing it right now. I'm doing research.
Like, I'm honestly gonna miss these days where we're just like waiting on the book and with so much anticipation and making conspiracy theories that, oh, yeah, George is waiting for the second coming of Jesus to release the book because he wants to show him, because he wants his reaction to it. And all the other theories that we made up during these years. But yeah, if you want to see why I think this book will release very, very soon, go watch that video. I ain't gonna explain everything twice. I don't love y'all that much. But yeah, I love you guys. Make sure to like, subscribe, and peace.